So this question comes up a lot. Who's really running the world? Is it the forward-facing, camera-facing people like Klaus Schwab, Bill Gates, Donald Trump, Keir Starmer, Justin Trudeau, Mark Carney? Are those the power players that are really running things? Or is it a secret cabal, sort of deep secret, deep state group of individuals running the show? Well, that's exactly what our next guest has been investigating. Derek Brose, investigative reporter, has been working on the Pyramid of Power series now for a long time and is just about to put the finishing touches on his final episode in this series, which really looks at the high level, I think, hierarchy of all of this, tying all of these pieces together. And we wanted to welcome Derek back to the show. Great to see you, my friend.
Hey, thanks for having me on, Clayton. I appreciate it.
My pleasure. So we've had you on before, of course, to talk about a lot of pieces of this, particularly the false flag episode that we focused on, where these false flags have been used to great effect to carry out wars. They dupe the public into rallying support for these things. But now in your final episode, as you approach this, you're really looking at sort of the hierarchy of who's really calling the shots, sort of the puppet masters behind everything. Can you walk us through what you're working on right now?
Yeah, so as you said, I've been working on this series for quite a while. This has been a 5-year project at this point now. And the whole goal was to describe the individual pieces of the structure, things like false flags, but the education system, the media, big tech, et cetera, and progressively get a bit more conspiratorial, if you will, but all based on facts and what we can prove. And so the goal of this final episode is to attempt to answer the question of who or what is at the top of the pyramid. And in the pursuit of that, I'm looking at everything you mentioned just now, the United Nations, the World Economic Forum, the Bilderberg Group, which I think are groups that play a role, but from my perspective are sort of the front-facing groups for deeper power. We are also examining, what does that term deep state even mean? What is the origin of that? Where does it come from? It was popularized in the English language by Peter Dale Scott, who's now in his 90s and not doing too many interviews anymore, but he did some great work really bringing that to the forefront. I think that term has been kind of co-opted, if you will, in the recent years to sort of, for some people, the deep state just means the left wing of the American political scene or progressives or George Soros. But originally it was describing more of the entire infrastructure. You have the Wall Street players, you've got organized crime, of course, which Whitney Webb and others have pointed to. You got the big oil industry and just all those different players who are extra governmental. You know, these aren't elected people, but they clearly are impacting our world around us. And then from there, we're going to even go deeper and look at, well, who are the people at the top of those? If the Bilderberg Group is just a representative of the real power, then who are they actually representing? And in the pursuit of answering that question, I'm featuring a number of really talented, educated researchers, everybody from David Icke, G. Edward Griffin, of course, both of them have been around for a long time doing this work. James Corbett, Mark Passio, Larkin Rose, so many other people who are bringing all their perspectives. Like in this episode, we are going to consider everything. Nothing is off the table. So the people who say it's the Jesuits, we're going to give them, their say and explore those theories. The people who say it's the Masons will do the same thing. And of course, even with Icke, let him explore his idea of reptilian or something otherworldly, other dimensionally at the top of this. And then people like Mark Passio more specifically say things like Satanists or Luciferians. So I'm doing my best to remain objective and continue with the sort of true crime approach that I've taken with this series. I don't really even consider it to be a conspiracy documentary because although it touches on things that might be labeled conspiracies, it's very much fact-based. It's very much just sticking to what we can prove. And of course, when we get to this final question, it's a little bit more murky. It's a little more difficult to say with certainty, but I'm going to do my best to really kind of point to the research that has been done and then, of course, draw my own conclusions. And to do that, I mean, I'm going back and I've been purchasing and downloading books that have been written in the 1800s and even some in the 1700s around the founding of the United States that were pointing at these different groups, from the Jesuits to the Freemasons, et cetera. And I think it's going to be an educational one. I don't think I'll be able to please everybody who has their own pet opinion or who they think is at the top, but I think it will be informative.
Yeah, this doesn't seem like the kind of documentary where you're out to please people, right? I mean, this is So yeah, there's going to be people that are going to be pissed off. They're going to say, well, no, it's all the Jesuits, it's all the reptilians, it's all, it's all the Jews, it's all the, whatever it is, right? They're going to say, they're going to have their opinion on all of this. So, so I think people throw these terms around. You kind of bring up a good point, which is, I think in modern day social media, you'll see people's responses to things, right? And they'll just say, it's the Jews. Then they'll just yell out, it's the cabal, it's the deep state blob. They just kind of throw out, these markers, and they assume that everything kind of falls under this window here. And I think what your research has shown is that it's not just cut and dry. It's just not black and white here, is it?
No, absolutely. It's definitely not black and white. And I will be exploring that claim with it's the Jews, or more specifically the Zionists. We have researcher Adam Green over at No More News who will be sharing his opinions. And as I mentioned, I mean, when I'm doing my research, I go back to the primary sources. So right here, I got a book called Foreign Conspiracy, written in the 1800s by Samuel Morse, the same man who invented the Morse code. He was actually a conspiracy theorist, and he believed it was the Jesuits and the Vatican Church. I got this one, Proofs of a Conspiracy, written also in the late 1700s, written by John Robeson, who was warning George Washington. You can find his letters online warning George Washington that the Freemasons had already infiltrated the United States. This one's called The Engineer Corps of Hell, written by Edwin Allen Sherman, who also points the finger at the Jesuits. These books are almost 200 years old, 150 years old. That doesn't mean they're factual just because they're old, of course, but I do find it interesting to go back and for people to recognize that these sort of lines of thinking and lines of questioning, they're not new. This isn't just something that came about because of the internet. Perhaps we have much more access to the information now, and so conspiracies and conspiracy research is more widespread. But there is no doubt that the claims of influence in the United States and elsewhere have existed, and there are 100% facts behind them. I mean, we can look at, just as one example, the fact that dozens and dozens of U.S. presidents, Mexican presidents, European monarchs, presidents and prime ministers around the world have been Freemasons, very high level Freemasons. That is, there's no controversy about that. That's documented fact. We can also look at the Russian Revolution, the French Revolution, the American Revolution, Spanish Revolution, the coup of Hawaii to make Hawaii a state in the United States. All involved people who were high level Masons. And in the same vein, you can also look and see Jesuit influence throughout history in different areas. So there is facts there. Now, it's just sort of where we get to the place where we might need to speculate a little more is how much of those influences which were involved in wars and revolutions and uprisings still exist today. There are people who have theories that say the Freemasons and the sort of secret societies that exist today, the Bohemian Grove, Bohemian Club and others, that they have a lineage that dates all the way back to ancient Egypt, right? And the Egyptian secret societies or the Pythagorean Egyptian societies. I'm less certain that you can actually draw that distinction. There might be some groups who claim that and say, well, we're the modern version of this or that, but it's, I think, more hard and difficult to prove, although many of us might believe and suspect that there is literally just some lineage that has been passed down from the ancient Egypt or ancient days of Rome, and then secretly passed down and down and down. But for certain, we can say that in the last 150 to 200 years, there are people involved in secret societies who may have been inspired by those older groups that are behind the scenes and are influencing our world.
So I want to touch on the David Icke stuff because, here's a guy who was calling out this stuff before the internet was even around, right? So he was tapped into this well before, a lot of younger people came along and jumped on the internet and started exploring these topics. So the reptilian piece of this, it's very easy for people to slough that off and be like, oh, that's just way over here, fringe. But I've seen a lot of stuff. You've seen a lot of stuff. Where did you come down on your discussions with David Icke on this reptilian question? And can you explain a little bit of this to our audience? Might be sitting there like, okay, Clayton, now you've lost me. We can talk about Jesuits, we can talk about Freemasons, but reptilians running things? It's too much.
Yeah, I definitely think that's a bridge too far for many people. So I was lucky enough to go to the UK last October and to sit down with David for 3 hours. And I released most of that interview, but a few of the questions are specifically for the documentary, and his answers will be coming out when we release this in May or June. And of course, I had to ask him about his claims. And so for those who don't know David's history, He came about, of course, in the early 90s. He had a controversial start, sort of claiming he was the second coming of God or Christ, however you will. And I didn't get into that with David, but since then, in the 90s and late 90s, he started to expand his research, and he drew the conclusion based on studying various historical references, cultural references, that he believes point to the existence of not only some sort of alien, but maybe I think he would say extra dimensional, not necessarily like from another planet per se, but something else that does sort of present itself in the physical form as 10 to 12 feet tall reptilians standing on 2 feet. And of course, others in different areas of research, UFO research particularly, have kind of taken that over the years. But David was really the first person that I know of that proposed that idea and kind of got it out into the masses. And I don't want to speak for him, of course, but I encourage people just to read his works, read his books, because David, I think that's the main thing he always comes at whenever people say, "Oh, you're crazy. There's no way that's possible." All he asks is for people to look at the research that he's done, to look at the historical references he puts forward, and then you can make up your own mind. But I did sort of dig into that and ask him to describe, like, what do you think is at the top? Is it the reptilians at the top of the pyramid? Is there something else? And I don't want to give away his entire answer, but the short version of it is that he believes that even the reptilians are not the top of the pyramid, but there is this energy, this spirit, if you will, that has possessed them and that possess certain humans here on our planet that we might call evil. We might call, different things, but that's sort of what he places at the top of it. So even if somebody was to say, well, I don't believe the reptilians, but there's, Henry Kissinger or whatever human being you want to place at the top of the pyramid, in David's eyes, it's still that those human beings are actually possessed by something that has taken over and is this sort of dark force that does feed off of war and violence and fear and death and all the sort of things that we would term negative in our dualistic reality.
Right, because at the heart of it, we say, "Oh, there's a spiritual answer to this question, the pyramid of power," but it might really be, did I say physical? We might think it as a physical response here, but really might be a spiritual top of this pyramid, right? I mean, that's controlling all of us, controlling these pieces of these demonic pieces. When I had my friend Tucker Carlson on a few months ago to talk about the White House, under the Biden administration, really believed that it was like demonic forces running things there. And I'm sure there are people within the Trump administration who might have that same kind of control over them at a spiritual level that are doing pretty nefarious things, trying to lead us into war with Iran or whatever else it is. So it's really maybe at the heart of it is it's a good versus evil story.
I tend to believe that, and this is where it gets interesting, because obviously in our broader community of truther, the search for truth and justice and all these sort of things, there's a lot of different views, and including there are Christians in the audience and your audience and my audience, and I have no issues with them. But so for a Christian, they filter everything through that lens. So the answer to this question would be, well, of course, it's the devil, it's Satan, that's at the top of the pyramid. And definitely I interviewed people who feel that same way. I don't necessarily if I would use those terms. I'm not one who takes the Bible as a literal historical document. And in fact, chapter 16 of the Pyramid of Power, which is available now, explores the way that religion and secret societies have been used to manipulate humans and get us to support all kinds of injustices throughout history. But with that said, I definitely do believe my personal perspective, some of which I will be sharing in the final episode, is that this is a spiritual battle at the end of the day. That there are human players and organizations and institutions we can point at, and that's a real physical, reality. But I do think there is some deeper, more esoteric, spiritual aspect to this that perhaps many people are not even tuned into. And ultimately, I think that's what it really comes down to. I do think it's important. Obviously, I'm taking the time. This is the biggest project I've ever undertaken. 5 years of working on this. So far, the pyramid, 6 hours plus. This last episode's probably going to be 45 minutes to an hour. And I'm just doing daily research, diving into this. I've put in over 1,000 hours into this project. I think it's an important topic to explore. Like I said, I don't know if any of us can say for certain, but what I'm trying to do with this series is to present as much factual evidence and to show people who are going down these rabbit holes, instead of just sort of loosely holding ideas of, like you said earlier, Clayton, what's the cabal or it's the deep state blob or whatever. Like, let's get as close to actually pointing to individuals so that we can have some real accountability, because I don't think there will ever be real accountability if we're just sort of vaguely discussing this without actually, getting to the bottom of it. And perhaps we can't truly get to the bottom of it and ever know for certain, because there doesn't exist a document that says, here's a list of all the CIA agents that are in the media, or here's a list of all the groups running the world. But surely there are lots of theories. There's, names have been tossed around like the Committee of 300, of course, the roundtable groups. And I'm exploring each and every one of these ideas. There's also another one, Synarchy, which I've only recently become familiar with. And my goal is, again, to try to give people that fact-based, documented information at thepyramidofpower.net. People can find all of the episodes and every single transcript with all of my sources, links to every source document, primary source is available there. And I'm going to take that same tact with this final episode, even though admittedly we do have to, I think, get into a little bit of speculation to have that conversation, because there's no, like I said, there's no firm document that we can point to of that final boss at the top, if there even is such a thing. Some of the people I interviewed say they don't even believe that that's the accurate way to look at it, that perhaps it's just another roundtable at the top of, a collection of individuals rather than, one single person or one single group.
Well, I mean, even like the David Icke stuff. I mean, I've definitely interviewed people. I've watched many interviews. I've spent countless hours looking at the secret space program, and you have this really international cabal of individuals who are together. But if you listen to their stories, they've been transported to the moon. They've been literally in the moon base. Multiple witnesses who have been, I've spoken to a former Air Force member who's been to the moon. And what she told me was horrifying. And these individuals at the moon base, for crying out loud, controlling and basically almost allowing us sort of puny humans to even have a seat at the table because we're so far behind in technology. And so this reptilian question, the white-haired Nordics question, like, I'm there for all of it because, I'm not a closed-minded individual. I'm interviewing, members of the Air Force, members of the military who've seen these things and who've been to these meetings and witnessed this stuff. So we go about our day, we go to Target, we have lunch with our family, we put dinner on the table at night, but there's some serious stuff going on that we have really no idea behind the scenes, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's probably why it's so overwhelming for many people, Clayton, is because we are generally just good people and trying to go about our day, take care of our families, accomplish our goals and have a good time when we can, while also understanding there's massive governmental corruption. And that's one thing to understand. The government's corrupt. There's scandals happening, but to really try to get to the bottom of it and understand, well, who is at the top? Because I think some people make the mistake, and let's say maybe more in a mainstream view, that government is inept. And so corruption happens, but it's really just because government isn't, efficient enough. We just haven't perfected that institution. And actually, Gary Allen, a researcher from the 70s, who was one of the first people to point at some of these things, he called in his book, None Dare Call It Conspiracy, he said there was sort of two ways to look at history. One is this conspiratorial view of history, which is that people conspire together. There's nothing crazy about that. Men, women, groups get together and say, hey, maybe we could fix this oil market to have some extra profit. Or people conspire together to throw a secret birthday party, humans conspiring. The other view of history is just this accidental view of history, that everything is just kind of happenstance and unfolding, just randomly. I think there's a combination of those two things that exist. I'm not one of the people that think every single world event is completely staged and controlled and, the cabal has their fingerprints and everything. I think that's actually a pretty disempowering worldview that takes away our own agency, that we do have power. We do have the ability to affect the world around us, but we shouldn't obviously clearly write off the reality that there is conspiracies that are affecting our world and that there are people coming together for financial purposes, for power, for maybe just outright evil, who do conspire together to benefit themselves and to keep the world going in a direction that will keep them at the top. Like, that's what it's ultimately about, is how do we keep making moves, financial moves or otherwise, that are going to keep us and our progeny. That's the other big thing I'll say about this, is that these folks, whatever group you want to point at, and all the groups that I'm studying, they think generationally. I think this is why they're winning, or at least they appear to be winning, is because us on the freedom side of things, while we're trying to figure out all these things, we're very disorganized. We're arguing with each other. We're dividing against each other. We're, distracted by daily social media, whatever is trending, whatever is, the latest thing you're supposed to be offended by. While these folks, even down to the level of, say, Henry Kissinger and Rockefeller, they're thinking long term. They're thinking generationally. They know that they're working on goals that they are not necessarily going to live to see the outcome of, but they can think with that long vision. And I think that's why they've been able to be so successful, as they keep the masses kind of worried about how many likes do I have today, what's happening right now in this moment, instead of how can I plan for the long term. And I think that's really one of the goals of this series, is I'm trying to help people understand that there are solutions. I don't know if I mentioned this already, but every episode of the Pyramid of Power does end with suggestions for solutions. It also ends with, if you want to learn more, watch this documentary, read this book, do your own deep diving, because my goal was to take all of the best research that's already available, combine it with my own research, and make it 30 minutes or less. So the majority of the episodes are 30 minutes or less. There's a few that go beyond that, but it's been really rewarding, I'll say, Clayton, that over the last 5 years, I've gotten messages from people who've told me they've used the Pyramid of Power to homeschool their kids, that they've, somebody told me just the other day, they're getting their 15-year-old son to watch it. One of their 18-year-old kids is watching it. My goal is that this is going to be something that will be evergreen and that can live well beyond 2025 and can be a reference point for people who are just starting this journey, but not to sort of tell them like, hey, everything's hopeless, we're screwed, there's all these people controlling the world, but maybe give them some ideas on how we can take some of that power back. And then, of course, by being informed, we're more capable of making better decisions and deciding how we move forward.
At the end of it, would you say that after all of this research, is there a possibility that you might kick back on the easy chair and say, you know what? There's no one running this show. It's just a shit show. and it's all to chance. None of these groups, you know what? All of these people point to this, but you know what? At the end of the day, it is just sort of the natural order of things, and there's really no one running the show.
I'm definitely leaving my mind open to that possibility. I'll say this, I'm about halfway done with the script right now, and I still haven't written my conclusion. It's not like something I'm approaching where I already know how I'm going to end it. I'm going to go through all the different opinions, and I'm revisiting a lot of my old research. And so I'm not kind of coming into this with my own, all right, I already know I'm going to point a finger at the Jews, or I'm going to point a finger at the Jesuits or whatever. I'm reading and studying all those. I'm revisiting my old research that, I did when I first woke up, and deciding what still holds true. Because in my experience, sometimes when we were first kind of waking up, you consume a lot of material, and you might look back and realize, actually, some of those things that I held on to in the beginning, they're not as actually accurate or true as I thought. There's a piece of there that's some true, but maybe it's not completely true. So I am definitely approaching even my own writing with this conclusion with an open mind. And yeah, I might get to the point and say, you know what, these groups are there, but I don't think we can conclusively say any of them are at the top, or we can't say, it's being run. Because I do think what your comment there points to is another important aspect of this, that we are playing a role. In many ways, if we spend all of our time just obsessing over who's at top, obviously I think that's an important question. That's why I'm doing this project. But if we spend all our time doing that, then what are we, we're missing out on opportunities to take action in our own lives, to become more independent, to, grow our own food, to just whatever solutions you want to pursue, to try to be as free from these systems as possible, instead of obsessing and watching podcast after podcast, reading book after book, and oftentimes making yourself very miserable. And if you're stuck in fear, if you're stuck in anger, if you feel like things are hopeless, the big they, whoever they may be, have already won.
Right. Oh, that's a great point. If you're totally consumed by it and you're not spending time with your family and kissing your kids, and this is consuming you, then they've absolutely already won. And I think it takes away our own agency. You're right about that. So, Derek, where can people find the series and get ready for the final episode? Where can people go?
Yeah, so right now the best place is thepyramidofpower.net. That's got all 16 episodes available there. I ask everybody to excuse the plain bare website. I've just been so focused on finishing it. So in a couple of months, we'll revamp it and make it look all nice and fancy. But right now, everything you need is there. The video, the audio versions, the transcripts, everything is there. And I'll also mention, you can find it at my main website, theconsciousresistance.com. And if anybody is interested in supporting us, this entire project has been crowdfunded over the last 5 years. We've raised just over $40,000 that has been just completely donated. And all that's done, I haven't taken a dime from it. That's just gone to pay my amazing, talented editors who take my research, take my audio narration, and make it something that's worthy of watching. So if anybody's interested in contributing to our final crowdfunding for this last episode, you can go to theconsciousresistance.com. There's a little banner at the top, and you can click that. And we appreciate all the support. And most of all, though, what matters is just share it. Just share this information out. I've been working on this for 5 years, and every day new people are discovering it. And as I said, I do think this is going to be a project that I'm going to promote for the rest of my life. The plan is, once we're done, is to turn it into DVDs, USB drives, and I'm also going to be turning all the scripts into a companion book, so people who prefer to read this information can have access to it too.
Wow. Yeah, it's the project of a lifetime, right? It's great. That's great, Derek. Well, thank you so much for coming on, sharing your thoughts here with us on as you approach this final documentary piece of this, and it's been fascinating to watch throughout this process. Derek, great to see you. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Clayton.